So basically they're going to be doing the reverse of what they just did. Putting the frame on the rear axle and the front axle. I want to say that when the Model T at the peak of production, when they were coming out of the factory, they were coming out of the factory about every 90 seconds. One was rolling out of the factory. You look at some of those early videos and you just see one Model T after another driving out of the factory. And I always remember that the third one's a center door, just like mine in that video. Everybody thinks of the Model T and says, oh, they were all black. You can see the chassis all black on this one. But that's not the case with all Model Ts. The very early Model Ts came in a plethora of colors. From green to blue to red to gray. And then we get to about 1913, 1914, and they all go to black at that point. Anybody have an idea why that might have been? Why did Ford go to all black? Any ideas?
Make everybody equal.
Make everybody equal. That is not correct. Ford did not care about that in the least. No, World War I was more like that. Really had nothing to do with it either. U.S. got involved in World War I about 1917, even though the World War was started before that, was about 1914.
Cost.
Any other guesses?
Cost. Cost.
Cost. That's a good answer. Cost is one of the issues. Remember, Henry Ford was not trying to build the most expensive car. He was trying to build a cheap car for the masses that anybody could afford. The Model T was not the first Ford automobile. A lot of people think that it was. Ford Motor Car Corporation started in 1902 or 1903. And their first production car was a Model A Ford. Now when I say Model A Ford, people think of the Model A like it's sitting behind us back here. That's not what I'm talking about. The first Model A Ford was built in 1902, 1903. I think they went up to 1904. They were a two-cylinder automobile, and that's what started the Ford Motor Car Corporation. Ford then went from the Model A to the Model B to the Model C. They built a Model K, a Model N, a Model R, a Model S, and then the Model T. So the Model T was not even close to being the first one that they built. And you talked about cost with the paint. Prior to the Model T, the Model K was a huge six-cylinder automobile, which was exactly what Ford did not want to produce. His board of directors forced him to build that car because they wanted to have a big Ford automobile. But Ford shut that down eventually and started making the NRS, which was a direct predecessor to the Model T. So the cost is one thing. That the belief with the paint being black was that that was the cheapest paint that he could find was the Japan black enamel. But there's another factor that goes with it as well. Can anybody guess what the second factor is?
Speed. Speed.
Oh, I heard it. Speed. Fast drying, there you go. He found that the Japan black enamel was the fastest drying paint that he could find. That's one of the theories. And remember, he was trying to put these cars out as quickly as possible. So seconds matter. So that Japan black enamel would dry faster than the other paint. And I'll tell you what, that black enamel is a hard paint. That paint was hard. When I was restoring my Senator sedan, I can tell you exactly how every part was hung when it was painted, because that paint would drip down in areas like on the inside of the fenders, and I had to take a hammer and chisel to get that stuff off. I couldn't even sandblast the stuff off. Now we got, as the Model T progressed through what I'll call the black era, up to about 1925, then we start seeing colors appear back in the Model T again. Reds and greens and blues and grays. Now that happened in 1926 time frame. Why would he have gone back to colors? Any guesses? How about competition? By that point, the Model T had been around so long, and his competitors had made a lot of improvements in their cars, the Dodges and the Chevrolets of the day. And the Ford was falling behind in production numbers at that point, in sales numbers. So Edsel Ford tried to convince his father that they had to move on from the Model T. Henry Ford was a very stubborn man, and he refused as long as he possibly could. But there in the end, he had to concede. So while they were designing and getting tooled up for the next car, they did everything that they could do to keep the Model T selling. So they started painting them colors again, adding colors to the wheels, they started they lowered the car to make it look sportier. They even went as far as to nickel plate things like the head bolts to try to con people into thinking that it was a better car than it was. But at the end of the day, it was still a Model T Ford. It really wasn't that much different. And then in 1927, Henry Ford did the unthinkable. He shut down the Ford production, which had been going 24/7 for, what was it, 15 years. Shut down the production, sent his factory workers home, and retooled the plant for the Model A Ford. And there's a 1929 Model A sitting right behind us, which is a pretty early one of the Model A Ford. And then went on to build the Model A Ford from 1928 to 1931. You could get these Model Ts in a variety of different body styles, from touring cars, to roadsters, to sedans, to trucks. This is a standard chassis, but you could also get a one-ton truck chassis, which was a little bit longer, had a different worm drive rear end, geared incredibly low. You could tow a house with the thing. You can see they've got the engine back in the chassis. One of the hard things to do with that is getting that drive shaft line back up, and they obviously got that pretty easily. Brian's put the exhaust pipe on now. They're wiring up the starter on this side. Got the radiator going on. They're making good progress here. They're putting the brake lever back on. They've got the battery back in the battery carrier. Yes, ma'am.
Was there a special tool that they used to put the driveline back on?
There probably was. That's able to grab onto the U-joint and spin it, turn it one way or another to help line it up going into the engine, yeah.
Are there any other special items?
Not really. I mean, the Model T came with a toolkit. Every car that came out of the factory came with a toolkit. Now this is the wrench you're talking about right there. To be able to reach, you can see it's kind of curved a little bit. That allows it to reach down in there and grab that U-joint and turn it and help line it up as they slide it in. These are the other two tools that they're using, a pair of pliers and a crescent wrench. These did not come in the Ford toolkit, and neither did that yellow tool I just showed you either. Thank you, Brian. Other questions? Got quite a crowd back here now. I've got questions. Questions? Yes, sir, up there.
Yeah, did you say, when they put the car back together like this, that a third of the time is spent looking for metal bolts to copy Ford language?
I would agree with that statement completely. And typically also throwing wrenches and hitting hammers in the floor is very hard, yeah. That's what happens in my garage at least. They're getting ready to put the firewall back on here. They're still tying down the engine and the brake lever.
Do you need union brakes on this job?
No union brakes. And you're at 8 minutes right now. So you're doing pretty good.
No.
Well, that remains to be seen. Any other questions while we're standing here? The driver's side door, a lot of Model Ts did not have doors on the driver's side front. The early cars had no doors at all, so it wasn't an issue. But when they started putting doors on the touring cars and roadsters, they found that the brake lever and everything kind of hindered getting in on that side. The early touring cars that had doors did have doors on both sides, but they found that it was a hindrance on the driver's side. So instead of machining everything to have a door there, they decided just to put a blank, make it look like there's a door, but there's really no door there. Now on the Canadian Model Ts, the Model Ts that were built in Canada, they did have doors all the way through production on that side. But most Model Ts that were an enclosed touring or enclosed roadster did not have doors on the driver's side front. Any other questions here I can answer while we're sitting here?
Somebody needs to put an antifreeze in?
Yes, sir. What kind of gas? It just takes regular gas. I just burn the 89 octane gas in my Model T. But these Model Ts they just about burn anything. I think when we start getting to the point where you can't buy gasoline anymore, I'm going to start making my own alcohol, set up my carburetor, run alcohol. I'm going to continue driving my Model T.
over here. Is there an electric version coming out?
Is there an electric version coming out? That seems like that would be a sacrilege to me to convert. But people have done that. Even Ford himself experimented with an electric vehicle back in the teens, working with his buddy Thomas Edison. And they tell you, when you look at the picture of the car that they built, a lot of the parts on it were Model T parts that they put together to build an electric, but Ford never put it out like that. Hard to believe there were 15 million of these cars built, and it's nice for the hobby, for the car hobby. There's multiple car clubs that deal especially with Model Ts. The Model T Ford Club of America is one. The Model T Ford Club International is another. I'm a member of the International Club. I'm not a member of the Ford Club of America, mostly because I can't justify being a part, paying the dues in both of the clubs. But both clubs put out fantastic magazines, and if you're a Model T owner, I would highly encourage you to get involved with those clubs. If you're an antique car lover, I would highly encourage you to get involved with the Southeast Iowa Antique Car Club that puts most of the cars in this building on display for the Old Threshers reunion every year. This club has been involved with the Old Threshers since its founding, and it was actually founded by the early members who were displaying cars at the early Old Threshers shows and having such a good time that they said, well, let's get together and let's have a club. And that's how this club was formed. I've been a member of this club my entire life. My dad was one of the founding members of this club. My dad displayed cars through most of his life up here from the first Old Threshers all the way up until he no longer did. And now me and my brothers have continued that with the cars that we put on display. Some of my dad's cars, I've got one of my dad's cars on display downstairs, a 1909 Sears motor buggy. It's at the bottom of the left ramp as you go into the building. My brother has my dad's 1931 Model A four-door sedan on display this year. They're getting real close here. They're tying up the brake line, the emergency brakes, tying it back to the tunnel, hooking up the wires for the starter. We got the steer getting tightened up here. Firewall still being bolted on.
And issue of the shortage.
You guys are doing great, let me tell you. Fantastic. I think they're getting tired though. There's some sweat starting to show. This sweat starting to show on me, and I'm not even doing anything. We have numerous displays and talks on throughout the day in this area. They're on the board over here if you like to look. They're also in your programs every day. I would encourage you to come back at 1:30 is the next time that I'm involved in a talk where we're going to try and sell the audience on either steam power, electric power, or internal combustion engine power for your automobiles. And we'll have a 1909 Stanley Steamer out here, a 1916 Roush & Lang electric vehicle, and the 1909 Sears motor buggy. And we're going to try and sell you on which mode of operate or which mode of power to buy, as if it were 1909 or 1910 or whatever, and see if we can convince you to what mode of power to run. So I would invite you back at 1:30 to see that presentation. You can see they're getting the body put on now. Any other questions while we're watching these guys work? The Model T was not the cheapest automobile that you could buy. In 1909, the Model Ts, I believe, sold for about a little over $900 for a Model T. That's in 1909. In that same year, my Sears motor buggy was produced. It was a $395 car. But at the same time, Cadillacs and Packards and Pierce Arrows were in the thousands of dollars. So they weren't the cheapest, they weren't the most expensive. They were right there, lower middle. And that's what Ford was trying to do. But Ford continued to bring the cost of manufacture down through mass production. That mass production started in about 1913, 1914, was when he started the assembly line. Now a lot of people credit Ford with the assembly line. I'm not one of those people. Right down the street from Ford to the west of the Piquette plant where the Model T was first being built was the Everett Metzger Flanders plant. Actually, originally it was the Wayne automobile plant. Everett and Metzger were two different guys. One of them worked for Cadillac, and one of them was just a salesman. And they worked for the Wayne Automobile Company, and they wanted to build their own automobile. Well, Walter Flanders worked down the street at Ford. Walter Flanders was Ford's manufacturing manager. And Flanders was a mechanical genius. He was able to organize machinery such that a guy didn't have to walk all the way across the plant to get a part to put on an automobile. He's really who set things up for mass production by organizing things in logical steps to be able to assemble an automobile. Well, Everett and Metzger, unable to make any money on the Wayne automobile, asked their buddy Walter Flanders to come down the block to give them some advice on what to do. What can we do to make money on this car? So Walter Flanders walks down the block and walks into the EMF automobile plant, which was still the Wayne automobile plant at the time, and says, looks over their stuff and says, there's nothing you can do with this automobile. You need to retool and build a different automobile with interchangeable parts. You can make one part that'll bolt on anything, as opposed to taking time to fit each part to that particular car. So that's what they did. They lured Flanders away from Ford to come down the block to work at the Wayne automobile plant. They retooled things to build a new automobile, a 30 horsepower touring car and 30 horsepower roadster, which they labeled the EMF, Everett, Metzger, and Flanders. They made it a 30 horsepower automobile. So Ford was on his own. So it's questionable who had the assembly line first, whether it was Ford or the EMF factory one block down the road. The EMF factory was 3 times the size of the Ford plant at that time on Paquette Avenue. And then Ford eventually, once the assembly line got started, moved his place to Highland Avenue in Detroit, and that's where the bulk of the cars, the Model Ts, really started to shoot up, and they were putting cars out right and left. And then, to give you an idea, Ford was #1 in production for many of the years they were making the Model T. The EMF was either second or third down the list. EMF was putting out 20 or 30,000 cars a year. At the same time, Ford was putting out 200,000 cars a year. So that's the order of magnitude that Ford was doing things better than his competitors. And then at the EMF, eventually, Studebaker did a hostile takeover of the company, the Studebaker Wagon Works, and they started building the Studebaker. They converted the EMF into the Studebaker in 1913 and started making the Studebaker automobile.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
Cubic inches and horsepower.
Cubic inches and horsepower. Not sure on the cubic inches of it. I should know that answer, and I don't. Horsepower is 20 or 22 horsepower. I'll tell you that the pistons are about that big around. It's got about a 4.5-inch stroke on it.
I got it now. I figured
Yeah.
that.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. The car weight, it depends on the body style that's on the car. This probably weighs around 1,000 pounds. My center door downstairs weighs about 1,800 pounds. So a touring car was probably 1,100 pounds or so. A roadster a little bit less than that. They made the Model T Ford from 1909 to 1927. And then Ford had several other models before the Model T as well. The Model T, they made a Model A, a Model B, a Model C, a Model K, a Model N, R, S, and then the T. Yeah. How many people here have had a Model T in their history that they know of, in their family history? Awful lot. How many people here have had an EMF 30 in their family history? Only my family up there. That's the only. So you can see, even to this day, you see the Model T is still. Now hang on. Hold your applause until you actually see it move, okay? Let's see it move on its own power. Only did assemble it and get it running.
Maybe.
There we go, a little carburetor adjustment. Doesn't go backwards, Brian. Doesn't go backwards. It goes backwards, doesn't go forward. Does the horn work? So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. He's making a quick adjustment to the carburetor. You can hear it chugging a little bit. There it goes. You know, there you go. For 2022, it took us about 20 minutes to put that together, about 9 minutes to take it apart. We're at a good time here right now.